We have a very, very exciting fireside chat lined up next, and very, very curious to know more about magic illusions and the psychology behind it. Professor Wiseman, thank you so much for joining in. It's such a pleasure to host you at ISF. Before we get into the fireside chat, I'd like to take a minute to introduce the interviewers here. Shriya Naidu is joining us from IIT Gandhinagar. She is a junior project fellow at IITG and is handling outreach and public engagement projects at the Curiosity Lab at IIT Gandhinagar. She has conducted multiple large and small scale outreach programs aimed at making neuroscience and behavioral science more accessible. She is also the co-founder of Stimulus, a nonprofit aimed at fostering curiosity in neuroscience and psychology amongst 15 to 28-year-olds. Couldn't have thought of anyone better to conduct this interview. Shriya, over to you. We'll be taking questions from the audience towards the end of this chat, and feel free to all our audience members, feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll have Professor Wiseman answer all of them towards the end. Over to you both.
Thank you so much, Shruti. It was definitely, it is a pleasure being at India Science Festival virtually and to interact with an amazing psychologist of our time working at the intriguing intersection of magic and human behavior, Professor Richard Wiseman. It's wonderful to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
On behalf of the ISF team and the audience, I welcome you here. Now to introduce Professor Wiseman to everyone. He is a professor of public understanding of psychology at the University of Hertfordshire. He has written several best-selling books on magic, psychology, luck, and positive action. He introduces people to the simple genius behind magic and illusions through his YouTube channel, Quirkology. Professor Wiseman is also a member of the Inner Magic Circle and a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He also acts as a creative consultant and has worked with Darren Brown, The Twilight Zone, and the hit television show Brain Games. He's also given multiple keynote talks to organizations across the world, including the Swiss Economic Forum, Google, and Amazon. So it's wonderful to have you here. Your interest in magic is infectious, and as I delve into it more, I get curious to know more. So with that, let's begin this session and explore the psychology behind magic. So my first question to you, sir, is what intrigued you to study the psychology behind the perception of magic?
Oh, thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. It's going to be difficult to live up to that. But welcome. I'm in Scotland, the top of the United Kingdom. And yes, my interest in psychology and magic goes back a very, very long way. So when I was around about 8 years old, I got into magic and quite fascinated by how magicians managed to produce this sense of wonder and incredible phenomena. And when you get into magic, you realize there's a lot of science and psychology there, because in a way, every magic trick is a little experiment, and your experiment has to work. You have to fool people, and they have to see something that's impossible. So if you like, we can try one of those little experiments right now. So doing magic via the internet is a little bit difficult. Let me just pan back a little bit, and hopefully you can see more of me. Here we go. So let me just show you a very, very simple little magic trick. I'm going to tuck this, one of the first tricks I ever learned actually when I was 8 years old. You would tuck the handkerchief into your hand like that, and then give a little blow onto your hand, and then it disappears. So there we are. Very, very simple little magic trick. And when you learn that, you have to figure out how people are thinking and how they're feeling in order to be able to fool them. And I became more and more interested in that side of magic. And that led me to study the psychology of magic and study psychology. So I did a PhD, or an initial degree in magic, an initial degree in psychology, then a PhD on the psychology of deception. And now lots of my research as a professor is looking at the psychology of magic.
Wow, so that magic trick just blew my mind. It's a very simple magic trick, and I have no idea how that happens. There's definitely so much that illusionists have to learn from, from human psyche and behavior of humans. And so I think there's so much that psychologists probably can also explore in this domain, and that's what you're looking at. That's so interesting. So, what do you think that psychologists can learn from illusion artists? Where do these two areas intersect?
It's a very good question. And the answer is there's a lot that magicians can learn from psychologists and psychologists can learn from magicians. So if we look at I've got all these little things to show you here. So let's start off. It's quite difficult to do this. So this isn't a very good magic trick, but this, I'll show it to you because it'll illustrate what I'm talking about. So I hope you can see that. It's a coin, quite a large silver coin here. It's really odd because the angle is very weird on this. But let's imagine you want to take the coin and make it disappear. Okay, very simple little magic trick. What you do is you spend about 2 weeks of your life just dropping the coin like this. And then another 2 weeks taking a coin that's not there, like that. And then you put those two motions, those two movements together, and it looks like you've taken the coin, but actually it's over here. Okay. So there's quite a lot of psychology. That's really simple sleight of hand. It takes about a month to learn it, to do it like this. But there's a lot of psychology. So there's a lot of that psychologists can learn here. So first of all, I need to control your attention. So it's important that I look here because I want you to look at the coin. But when I appear to take the coin, I need to look at this hand so that you look at this hand. Okay. So even in that very simple kind of movement, you're picking up cues from me because we're social animals. We pick up, cues from one another all the time. So you look where I look. The other thing is that we follow moving objects. For good evolutionary reasons. So it's the hand that I want you to look at is the one that moves. You'll see that's the hand that does the big movement. The other hand is just a very small movement here. So already in the most basic piece of sleight of hand, we've discovered about eye movements and attention, and we discovered about movement of hands and attention. And that's just a very simple kind of bit of psychology there. So I think that psychologists have lots to learn from magicians, in part because magicians' experiments, the tricks they perform, have to work every single time in front of every audience. And in most psychology, with experiments, you don't get effects that work for everyone all of the time, where magicians know how to produce those sorts of effects. So I think there's a lot to be learned.
Thank you so much, sir. And it's so amazing that you have so many of these wonderful tricks up your sleeve, quite literally, and to illustrate for the audience what we're really talking about. And so I'm really intrigued to know if we're also, can we also manipulate cognitive aspects? I mean, you did talk about attention, but can we also alter memories? Like there are a lot of magic tricks where someone is probably having a note inside their pocket and they're not aware of it. So there's definitely a lot of cognitive aspects that are being manipulated during magic as well. Could you illustrate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So before we're talking about attention, obviously perception, very, very cognitive, and magicians manipulate that all the time, but so do optical illusions. So I've bought some of my favorite optical illusions to show you as well. This is 25 minutes of me just getting my toys out to show you all the toys like an 8-year-old child. So you've probably seen this before. It's a sort of model of Einstein, looks great. And when we start to turn it around, at some point, that illusion will break down and you'll realize that he's actually looking in the opposite direction. So you can see that it's a mask there. And when we turn it around this way, we create this 3D face. And the reason why this works is that most faces don't aren't concave, they're convex, they come out. And so when we see something that looks a little bit like that, our expectations kick in, and we see something that isn't actually the case. And that is true of a lot of magic. It's, normally when you see somebody do this action, the coin does end up over here. It's because we have expectations. And what magicians are very, very good at doing is taking those assumptions and expectations and exploiting them. 99% of the time, we're amazing because we make these assumptions and they're true. And what magicians do is they exploit the 1% of the time and trip us up. So if you see a chair, you might only be able to see 3 of the legs, but you assume there's a 4th leg. And most of the time there is. And you don't want to spend your whole life checking out every chair to make certain there's a 4th leg. You'd be there all day. But what magicians do is they look at that and go, you can't see the leg though. So what happens if I take it away? How could I use that for a piece of magic? So they're exploiting our assumptions, the assumptions that make us so wonderful. So that's a big part of it. I also brought along the Jastro boomerangs. And again, if anybody knows about science demos, you'll know these. So hopefully the top one looks smaller than the bottom one. And then when I put them the other way round, it's going to go the other way round. So it's a nice little demonstration there. Again, fooling our perception. So we've spoken about attention, we've spoken about perception, and you touched on another really important point, which is memory. Because when you see a magic trick, you don't have to be just fooled then. When you think about the trick afterwards, you need to be fooled as well. And all your friends are going to get together and you're all going to share the memory and say, well, I thought it was this and I thought it was that. And so what magicians do is they trip up memories as well. It means that when you come to remember the trick, often you can't remember the important details. Now, why is that the case? And it's because magicians are creating a fake narrative. And what appears to be important in the fake narrative is what you'll remember, because we remember important stuff. And what's really important in the real narrative, we'll forget. So, for example, we'll go back to my little coin here. If we're going to take this, what's important? Well, the important thing is I take the coin, I blow, and it disappears. And so often, that's what people remember. He blew on his hand and the coin disappeared. The bit they'll forget in the real narrative is that he transferred the coin from one hand to the other. That's not important. And so what you'll remember is this wonderful moment of, and it disappearing. And you'll forget the really important bit just before that. So magicians know how to manipulate memories as well. You're absolutely right.
Wow, sir, that is amazing. And to think about the theatrics that is involved in all of this, there's definitely another intersection that's going there in drama and magic. So I was wondering probably about your perspective towards magic. You are, you can say, behind the curtain and you know exactly what's happening and you're exploring this. So from your perspective, have you started looking at it, magic, from an objective lens, perhaps? Has it probably lost its magical charm?
No, magic evolves all of the time. And so magicians write up their magical experiments, their tricks, in journals like scientists, in books like scientists, and that literature goes back 100, 150 years. It's huge. And magicians are always coming up with new ideas. It's constantly fascinating. And a lot of it builds, like science, on the work of previous people. And so if I take a very, very simple, now I hope you can see this. I'm going to use a different colored band. It might be a little bit better. Let me zoom up on this one. The magic of the internet. There we go. So I hope you can see the band is around my top 2 fingers. And we're just going to give it a little a little shake. And now it's around the bottom 2. Okay. Let me just do that again because it wasn't the smoothest of ones. Top ones. And now it's bottom ones. That little illusion, and if you want to perform it, you put the band on your first 2 fingers here. As you close your hand, you pull the band across, you put in all of your fingers into the band, and now when you open your hand, it will jump to the other 2 fingers. And so that's how it looks like from the back. You put all your fingers in and it jumps. But what we're doing from the front is all the fingers are in there. I move my hand up and down to hide that little jump. Now, that was invented in 1911. Okay, so whatever that is, 110 years ago. And around about 30 years after that was invented, somebody realized you could take another band and put it around your fingers like that, and still the band would jump. So you can make it jump back again. And the reason for that is lateral thinking. All the band is doing is that. It doesn't matter whether the fingers are sort of masked off like that. So this is why magic is endlessly fascinating. People are inventing things nowadays that no one's ever thought of, for 120, 200, 100 years. So magic never gets boring. It's a great thing to be into. It always feeds your curiosity.
Oh, that is exactly what I'm also working on, sir. So I work at the Curiosity Lab, and magic is definitely such a fascinating thing. There's so much unknown about it. And I mean, that really brings me to a question. Why do people get so attracted to the unknown? Why do they seek the unknown? And also, being part of the Curiosity Lab, I understand that there is an innate desire to know something that you don't know, and there are some evolutionary processes along with it that are beneficial, that support this process of seeking the unknown. And we try to use educational kind of ways to inculcate this feeling of pursuing the unknown to improve learning in schools. But do you think magic could also come in there, perhaps in educational ways and therapeutic ways even?
Oh, yeah. So lots of my research has looked at magic and well-being. I mean, when you learn a very simple magic trick, you just think what you're doing. You're learning focus, you're learning practice, you're showing it to other people. So there's social skills. There's lateral thinking because you're having to think of different methods. There's digital manipulation, all these things. Some of my work has looked at it within an educational context, and it's exactly what you say. It increases engagement because it's not only that people are seeing something that they don't understand, they're seeing something that's impossible, and it appears to be happening right in front of their eyes. And it's very hard to see something that's impossible and not be curious. And so we've created educational videos, science videos, where you put magic in and people become more engaged with the videos. In other work, we've gone out to schools and taught children magic tricks, and they become more creative thinkers. When you give them measures of creative thinking, they perform higher afterwards than before. So I think it has all of these possibilities. And it's exactly what you say, that we have brains that are anticipating the future. That's kind of how our brains work to some extent. And so when something surprising happens, that's a very important piece of information because our model about the world was now wrong. So we become curious and we start to explore. And what magic does is take that idea and make it huge, because it's not that this thing is just surprising, it's impossible. And so I keep coming back to my little coin here. We know coins are solid objects. We all handle coins. We know that you can't take a coin, blow on it, and make it so small you can't see it. That's impossible. And so I think it takes that feeling we have about curiosity in the unknown and makes it really, really big. And it also allows us to dream. Good science is about dreaming about impossibilities and then seeing whether you can make them come true or not. And so being able to dream of these impossible things, the idea of getting to the moon, putting a person on the moon, that seems like a crazy thought, but we did it with science and technology. It's that same ability to imagine the impossible.
That is just completely brilliant. I did not think that I could think of magic in such a scientific way. And now that I think about it, it is such a scientific process. By thinking about the previous work that people have done, by kind of defining your experiment, by also trying to play it out and see if it really works. I think I want to take out some time to delve into the new book of yours that is coming, Hocus Pocus, Bringing Skepticism to New... I'm so sorry. It was regarding the history of magic. I'm so sorry. I mixed up your work, sir. You have so many amazing works that... I just mixed that up. So I wanted to actually talk about History of Magic, the book that that is going to come out. And since you've talked about previous literature that you magicians also rely on, so maybe if you could just give us a little introduction about what that is going to be about.
Well, it's another reason why magic is so fascinating. It really does preserve its history, like science. And so David Copperfield, the legendary illusionist, he performs every night in Vegas, and he's an incredible magician. He's also created a secret museum of magic, and this thing is huge, and it's in Las Vegas. And I was lucky enough to be shown around it, and I said to David, "Why don't we do a book about the history of magic based on the museum?" So the new book is all about that. It's called David Copperfield's History of Magic, and it takes readers through the museum and talking about the history of magic. And there's, again, a lot in there about science and magic. So one of my favorite stories is about Houdini. Now, you may not remember, we won't remember Houdini, but you may not have heard of Houdini. He's this amazing escape artist from the sort of turn of the last century. And so they'd lock him up in straitjackets or cells, prison cells, and he'd always escape. And he was legendary. And so one day he comes to Scotland, actually, where I am at the moment, and they lock him up in a prison cell, and he can't pick the lock. He's trying and he's trying, and he's there for a couple of hours, and he can't pick the lock. He can't get out of the cell, and he just can't understand why he can't do it. And then he leans on the cell door, and it just swings open because it's never been locked. So he's trying to pick a lock which has never been closed. And so, as he says afterwards, what was trapping him in the cell was his own assumptions about the world. In the same way that magicians trap you in their world, he got trapped by his own assumptions. And I think it's a very good lesson to all of us, that no matter how smart we are, and no matter how much we know, we're making assumptions and we can trip ourselves up. And so the book has those stories in it, celebrates the history of magic.
So all of these stories, I feel like they are so motivating. There's so many takeaways, and it's not just about the magic. It's also kind of what you feel about kind of the motivation that you get to pursue more and kind of just broaden your thinking. And that I also want to bring up Hocus Pocus, Bringing Skepticism to New Audiences via Comics, because it's such an interesting piece of work. And I think it's also great for children to kind of, and I also think that it could be a very good science communication tool. So could you also delve into that a little bit?
I can. I wish I had an issue to show you, actually. It's a comic. We decided I worked with Jordan Culver and Rick Worth, and they produced comics, science comics. And I said, how about we do one about skepticism and the paranormal and magic? And it's called Hocus Pocus, and you can look at the website. And it takes people through skeptical thinking in this very kind of engaging way, and it's interactive and so on. There's little magic tricks in there. And we've done some experiments, some science communication experiments with it. And again, people find it a very engaging way, in part actually because I'm dyslexic. And so I much prefer pictures to words. So when I saw their wonderful work, I was very, very engaged with it. And the other thing about magic, we should say, is that what I find incredible is that you can really get into magic. You can become the greatest magician in the world for almost no cost. You know, a pack of cards that doesn't cost very much, or a coin, or some rubber bands. It's why it's a great kind of teaching tool, because these are very inexpensive objects. And also what you're showing people is the potential. You know, this isn't just a coin, it's something that you can make disappear, and you can give people a wonderful experience. You can take something that's very ordinary and make it extraordinary. And when you're talking about those take-home lessons, I think that's another really important take-home lesson. There's magic in that sense in all of us.
So that is extremely touching. And I mean, being probably someone who was also fascinated by magic as a child, and then probably growing up and kind of realizing that magic is all just about tricks. I do want to ask, do you believe that magic as a naturally occurring phenomenon could really exist? Can we all believe in a Cinderella dream or like a Disney dream happening? What do you think about it?
Well, what magicians do, they do show you a trick, but what they're really giving you is a magical experience. So it isn't about the fact I don't transfer the coin. What I really care about is seeing your face when I take something, blow, and that's the magical experience of making it disappear. We're showing people what might be. And we're getting them to open their minds to other possibilities. And that's great. What we shouldn't do is tell them that there's real magic, in that this is really magic. It's not. It's a trick. It's psychology. What I think is really magical, though, is when you open people's minds to those possibilities and they create those things for real, whether they create them through working hard in their own lives, or whether they use science, or whether they use technology, that you kind of awaken a dream because they see something in front of them that they can't explain. And it's not like going to a film or reading a book where you know it's a simulation. Magic is real in the sense of it happens right in front of you, and it seems to actually occur. But it can awaken people's dreams, I think, to what might be, and then they can figure out ways of making those dreams actually happen.
Wow, sir. So, I mean, I did look into some of your work on positive action, and I really did find that very interesting because what you're talking about magic happening when people just open their minds to certain possibilities. A lot of your work is so associated with motivation, positive action. Could you also go a little bit into how you even developed the concept of positive action and how magic is associated with it, and how it's probably helped and impacted many people across the globe?
Yeah, so the other part of my work we haven't spoken about at all is on how you get people to do that second part, how you get them to be into a better place, more successful or happier or whatever it is. And that started about 20 years ago. I wrote a book called The Luck Factor about how to be lucky, and how if you're optimistic, it made you attracted kind of people towards you. You kept going when the going got tough, and so on. And then I did another book about, as you say, positive action, which is the way in which your actions affect how you think and behave. So commonly, our understanding of the mind is the way you think, your emotions you feel affect your behavior. So if you feel happy, you smile. That's true, but the opposite is also true. If you force your face into a smile, and people who are watching this can try it now, you'll feel happier. And so it's about how psychology and science can be used to change lives, to improve lives. So I think there's an overlap with the magic. It's quite different in some ways, but there's an overlap there. It's always about what might be and how you create a better future for yourself and others.
Thank you so much, sir. So I do want to know, to all, even the young audiences and the curious audiences who are here, what would you like to say to them about probably incorporating, or even if they're interested to explore magic, where could they begin, and why should they even explore and get into magic? And also, maybe if while you're answering that, could you also talk about how the awareness of how magic can help in motivating and improving people's imagination, and even in science comm, that is important, and how probably platforms like ISF are they helping in any way achieving this goal?
I'm sure they are. I mean, I think this overlaps with some of what you're talking about with your previous speaker, who was absolutely fascinating. We need people to understand psychology and science and technology, and that's the world they're living in. And if they don't understand it, we can run into all sorts of problems, as we're seeing to some extent in the world today. So those people that are curious about science and technology probably don't need very much motivation to get into it. However, there's a lot of people that aren't curious about it at all. And how do you get them to share the love and enthusiasm that we have for this topic? And of course, one way is that you can look at something they are interested in and explore the science of it. It doesn't have to be magic. You can look at the science of music. You can look at the science of dance. You can look at the science of drama, anything, art, anything they're interested in, there will be a scientific component. I think magic is particularly interesting because you can stand in front of a group of people at a science center or a classroom or whatever it is and do something incredible. Most magic is fairly straightforward, and people will lean forward and they'll want to know how you did what you did. And so you've got their attention. And that's the first part of any kind of communication. And in teaching them these very simple tricks, you're teaching them a whole range of skills, and you're getting them to think creatively and, more importantly, critically. And also, when you come to learn magic, you'll make horrible mistakes. I mean, it's one thing for me, to sit here and just go, oh, you put the elastic band on and then it jumps. Well, I've been doing this for, 40 years or something. When you first try it, you'll be all over the place and the band will flick off and you don't know what's happening. So you learn that actually to learn magic, you need to focus and make mistakes and learn from them. And these are all great learning lessons in terms of science and technology. So if people are in that position at a science center or a school or going out and giving talks, I think it's a really good thing. And it's very easy. There's loads of beginners books on magic, which are out there. So I think that would be my answer. The second part of the question, what was the second part? Just remind me.
Right. I wanted to know if platforms like ISF are also helping contribute to this understanding and kind of connecting science communicators to probably encourage the incorporation of such diverse and different ideas to promote science communication.
I hope that they are. I mean, when lots of people, so when I tried to learn a different language at school, I found it incredibly difficult. And so when you talk to me about learning French, which is what we were taught at school, my memories are just of agony of sitting in this class, not being able to do this thing. But that's a very good learning lesson, because that's how many people feel about maths and many people feel about science. I didn't have those problems. I got maths and science straight away. But many people, it's just a miserable experience. And so when you talk about science and maths, they go, oh my goodness, that was like being at school. It was terrible. So what can you do to bring those people on board and give them a good time to replace those negative memories with something more positive? And I think that's what good science communication is about. It has to touch emotion as much as it touches information. And so, platforms, like the Science Festival and so on, if they can do that, if they can make people smile and laugh and have a good time when they're finding out about science, it will kind of get them to be thinking, oh, actually, science isn't this terrible thing that you get wrong all the time. It's a kind of fun thing.
I hope the science communicators in the audience are taking notes. That was a wonderful remarks. So I think that was definitely, with the tricks and your perspectives, I was blown away. Thank you so much for those wonderful comments. I think it's time we can take some questions from the audience as well. So we have an attendee who is asking about magic and health. You did mention that. So maybe you could elaborate on the relationship between magic and health.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I have a paper out there on a platform called PeerJ, which is all about magic and well-being. And so magic has been used in various ways. If people have motor coordination problems, often they have to perform the same action again and again, and it becomes a very boring task. But if you can incorporate magic into that, it becomes a meaningful task. And so that can help in terms of health. Also, in terms of a healthy lifestyle, connecting with others is extremely important, because then you have people to talk to, and so they can insulate you when things go wrong and help you and so on. And magic does connect you with other people. You've got something to show them at the party or talk about or whatever. So we know that that's another pathway. There's also been a lot of work with magic in hospitals carried out all over the world, where children often are very anxious, obviously, about being in hospital, and showing them a magic trick can lower that anxiety, but also they have something to show the other people in the hospital again. And so all this work, I think magic is quite unique in that, because you can learn a magic trick very, very quickly. You can show it one-to-one. It's fairly quiet activity. It's not like giving somebody a drum in a hospital and saying, here's how you beat the drum, which you probably don't want, or even sing a song or even dance. I think it's quite unique. It's often a quiet thing done between two people that requires practice. And so as a performing art, I think it's very helpful in those sorts of contexts.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very interesting point regarding using it in hospitals as well. I have personally known about clown therapy, and magic almost seems to be on a very similar spectrum, but at the same time, the uniqueness of it being so intimate is definitely very interesting and to be considered. So I do want to ask, in a lot of sense, or rather one of the attendees asks, we've been kind of picking out from behavioral therapies, from behavioral concepts in psychology about what magicians are doing. But has it ever happened the other way around? Or is it possible that the psychologists discover something new about aspects of human psychology from what magicians are doing?
Oh, psychologists will. Psychologists have done, because magicians are out there doing these experiments all the time. And so absolutely. I thought you were about to ask the other way around, which is, have magicians learned from science and technology? And to some extent they have. Some magic tricks involve science. If you look, there's a YouTube video I made a very long time ago called the color changing card trick, and that relies on a psychological principle. So I think there's been some learnings from science and psychology to magicians, but most of the activity is the other way around. It's scientists learning from magicians. We shouldn't forget, a lot of very early on, science and magic were in the same kind of demonstrations and lectures. That it would be a very theatrical public demonstration of magic tricks and then science experiments. The two weren't separated. And it still happens in chemistry. Chemistry people often do demonstrations if they're magical and so on. So this has a very long history. Yeah, it's a good question.
Oh, yes, that also reminds me of, I think a lot of Indian children would have done this. When we were learning chemistry early on, we were asked to put turmeric on a paper and then put soap. And that would create a red dye, or rather red pattern. And that was the first probably magic trick we saw, even including writing with lemon on a piece of paper, and that would be invisible ink. So that
Oh, it's great. It's great. I mean, one of the first things I brought out here, the balancing bird, which is just brilliant. So this is goes on the little tip of the pen here. I hope you can see it. I'm going to take it right up here and give it a little tap, and just balances on the tip of the pen. So magicians they don't use this, because lots of people know about this. You can buy it now in lots of shops. I can't get it right at the end. There we go. But the question is, how would magicians use that? So you think, well, let's imagine the bird is a person, and let's imagine you want to levitate the person on stage. The obvious thing to do is put all wires and strings and things coming up here. But if you use this technique, you only need one support of some sort, and that person will be levitated on stage. That's the secret of a lot of magic levitations. And so it's exactly the same principle, but used in just a way that affords you. Because normal people, as it were, would think that you need lots of points to balance the bird. In fact, it turns out there's only one. So again, you'd think, well, how would you apply that to a person? How would you get to that situation where the center of gravity is way off with a person? And that's what magicians love to think about. So there's a little task there for you more engineering oriented folks.
It's actually very interesting because the Center for Creative Learning at IIT Gandhinagar has recently made the exact same thing, and they're using it to teach children science. So there's definitely so much potential out there for such magic tricks. So we have a question regarding probably your roots, and if you were a professional magician before you started studying psychology, or was it vice versa? How did this transition happen?
I worked as a professional magician. So I got into magic when I was about 8 years old. My very first magic show when I was 9 years old, and then I was performing magic all the way through until I was about 19 years old. And I was doing a lot of magic on the streets. It's quite a good place to learn stuff, actually. So I was doing that. I went to America for a little bit. And then I got so fascinated with psychology that I decided to switch and do a psychology degree. And at the time, my initial qualifications were in maths and physics and chemistry. And so the obvious thing to do was to go into one of those three areas. But I was just fascinated by people because of the magic. And so I went into psychology. And what's great about psychology is that you can study anything you find fascinating. So if you're into dance, you can look at the psychology of dance. If you're into whatever it is, home decorating, you can look at the psychology of home decorating. It's hard to do that so much with physics and chemistry. So I think if you've got a passion, if there's a fire that's burning inside you, then if you can figure out a way of making a living out of that passion, you probably have got the equation for happiness right there. And if you want to find out what your passion is, I always say to people, imagine you're stranded on an island in the middle of nowhere, and you're allowed one stack of books. What are those books going to be about? For me, it'd be a stack of magic books. But what would it be for other people? That's probably the quickest way of finding out what your passion is.
Wow, I'm going to do this exercise today. I think I really need to revisit and see where my passions lie. And I think that's a great exercise to even kind of direct yourself in whichever way you want to go. Thank you so much. So when we're talking about what you want to do in future, or kind of the direction you want to take, children are generally the ones who have the most brilliant, extraordinary thoughts about what they're going to be when they grow up. And maybe something that I would want to, or one of the audiences would like to know, is that can younger children learn magic easier? So is it something that elders like me, if I want to try out a magic trick and probably switch into being a magician, would that be harder for me, or is it easier for younger children?
It's a very good question. It's an odd thing. Most magicians have got into magic by the time they're 8 or 9 years old. There must be some psychology behind it. But almost all of us, I mean, all of my friends are magicians, and we're all in the same generation. We all learnt it when we're 8, 9 sort of years old. However, anyone obviously can learn to do magic. And if you learn to love it, that will just come out of, you just communicate it in the same way as if you love science or you love engineering. Somehow the audience pick up on that. They pick up on the authenticity. There is nothing worse than seeing a speaker telling you they love something when they clearly don't. And you just feel part of you dying. And that gets back to that passion thing. The other thing which we haven't touched upon, but just briefly mention, the other thing that's great about magic is that with cardboard, you create bits of magic. I mean, you've got the sort of 2 bits of thing here, this one. It's great for maker skills. It's really good for making stuff. I'm 55 years old. I still sit upstairs at evenings cutting up bits of cardboard, gluing them into boxes, and thinking, oh, that's quite good. So it encourages maker skills as well, and I think that's great in terms of science and exploration.
So what do you think? How long do you think it would take an amateur to learn a magic trick on average? I'm assuming it also depends on the magic trick, but what would you like to say?
Oh, it's really difficult. I mean, you can learn this thing in whatever that is, 5 minutes. It will take you an hour of practicing probably to get it smooth enough that you're happy to do it in front of people. And then it will take you a lifetime to how to figure out how to present this so that it's not just a puzzle. So you might say, oh, somebody gave me this magic band the other day, and I paid quite a lot of money for this band because they told me it could do something incredible. They told me it could jump from some fingers to the other. My goodness, they're right. It actually jumped. So you make up a little story, or you get someone to blow on the magic band as it jumps. So it isn't about you. You know, I think there's a difference between showing off, which is about you, and performing, which is about the audience. And as good science communicators, we should be performing, always thinking, are they enjoying it? Are they getting it? Not, am I just looking like I'm really intelligent or whatever it is?
Thank you so much. So I just, like one of the audiences wanted to know, in your experience, how do different societies and cultures perceive magic? Does it vary greatly? So, I mean, it would have been so amazing if you would have come to India and you would have probably also experienced the cultural difference. But what do you think in your experience?
Well, I did go to India many, many years ago, about 20 years ago. I had a wonderful time, and India's got some incredible magicians. While I was there, I was looking at the Indian street magicians, who, my goodness, just the ability to captivate a crowd and hold them is astonishing. It's astonishing. And they have a little trick called the diving duck, which is a little plastic duck or a wooden duck that's placed on water, and it dives under the water and comes back up again. And I must have watched that, I don't know, probably 10, 12 hours. I was watching I was following these performers around. I couldn't figure out how they were doing this. It's a really old piece of Indian street magic, so it's wonderful. So every culture has entertainment magic, and that's what I'm interested in. Now, of course, cultures vary massively on whether they believe in, quotes, real magic. And often people mingle those two together. And actually, I think they should be kept apart. But you know, every culture, to my understanding, has entertainment magic. It has somebody doing something that makes you smile and laugh and appears impossible. But of course, it varies. And that's what's lovely about it. So Japanese magic, for example, often extremely intricate, extremely optical. And so this is a piece that, again, some people say, well, we are, this works good. So this is the, I can't see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cubes. And when we turn it around here, it goes to 6, I think. So invented by a wonderful Japanese professor, Sugihara. And that's very kind of a Japanese approach, very clever, very optical, very smart. And so, yeah, each culture has its own way of doing entertainment magic, which is wonderful.
Thank you so much. So that was wonderful illusion. And you demystified it for us by just showing us how the optical illusion works. And you demystified so many different magic tricks. So I am a little curious to think that, do you think magicians might feel a little insecure about demystifying magic?
No, there's magic you can tell people about, and there's magic you shouldn't tell people about. And so I had a YouTube channel called Quirkology, which has got loads and loads of magic and stunts and all these sorts of things on. And there's hundreds of them there. And I never had one complaint from one magician ever. So there's a kind of line in the sand where it's fine for me to tell you about rubber bands or about the coin trick, because magicians can still fool you and will fool you. It doesn't really give away their proper secrets. And that's what's interesting about magic. It has held on to its secrets for a very, very long time. And the reason for that is when you find out how most magic tricks are done, it's a disappointment. You know, it's a thread or a mirror or something. And you expected this complicated, wonderful thing, and it isn't. The wonderful experience is watching magic. And that's why magicians don't tell you how tricks are done. So you have that sense of wonder.
Thank you so much, sir. So talking about different magicians, even over time, I'm curious to know if there are any different sort of paradigms and if there are any shift in paradigms. So one of the audience members is asking, like the shift from Newtonian to Einsteinian physics, similar to that, are there any shifts in paradigms for magic?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And yes, there are. So most, and it's to do with performing circumstances. So most magicians started out, say about 18, well, not, if you start in the 1800s, you've got magic on the street. They're going from fairs to fairs. They're street magicians, which means you've probably got a little table and some props. And then around about 1840, you start to get theatres in the UK and other places in the world, and magic moves into those theatres. Now it becomes stage magic. And at some point, they start playing around with mirrors. And mirrors are a nightmare on stage because the reflections go everywhere. But they realize that if you put a mirror into a box, you've created your own little mini stage in the box. And that gives rise to all these illusions you see where people get in and out of boxes. And so that all happens. And that carries on for a long time. And then you get cinema coming along. So people aren't going to those stage shows so much. And so you get much more a sort of cabaret parlor type magic. And then today there's been a shift into what's called street magic. It's something like David Blaine, who's going out into the streets and performing, going back to the roots. And particularly what's called close-up magic, which is magic performed just a few feet away. So each kind of generation of magicians is often working in a slightly different paradigm, in the same way that paradigms within science and technology change as well.
Yes, sir. And there's also this kind of maybe I would like to call it a thin line difference between science and in psychology and a subject called parapsychology, where we have so many different overlapping concepts, but at the same time, there is a difference, or rather psychologists and scientists are trying to create a difference between what is science and what is probably not. A very interesting concept that always comes up is hypnotism. And one of the audience member wants to know what it's about and is it related to magic?
Oh, it's a good question. So hypnotism is a tricky one. Within psychology, there are two approaches. One is that it is a trance state, that you're in a different state of consciousness. The other is that you're essentially sort of playing a role. And so it's a bit like if you dress somebody up as a police person, they start to play the role of a police person. And so hypnosis is a bit like that. They know how they should act and they start to unconsciously act like that. And the argument, as I understand it, is that when it comes to therapy, it might be a little bit more like the trance one. When it comes to stage hypnotism, where you get lots of people on stage and they all start running around like chickens or whatever it is they're doing, that's closer to role play. Does magic use hypnotism? Not directly in the way you'd understand it, but it does use language very, very carefully. And language is key to hypnotism. It does put suggestions into people's minds. So if I've got a deck of cards here. Oh, it doesn't matter. If I had a deck of cards, if I say choose a card, and I'm trying to make you choose a certain card and influence your behavior, and I say choose a card, you're really hard to influence because I've just put so much attention on choose that you'll go, I have that one. Oh, no, I have this one. If I say, oh, just hold on to one of these cards for me, it plays down the choice and it's really easy to persuade you to choose a particular card as you take it out the deck. And it's very similar to hypnotism. You're influencing people by the words you're using, or you're getting them to play a certain role by the role that you're putting them in. So yes, there is an overlap there, but the psychology of hypnotism is fascinating. And there's been some brain scanning studies now looking at hypnotism as well. But yes, so there's an overlap, but it's quite a small overlap.
Thank you so much, sir. And this was an amazing 1 hour is gone by, and I haven't really noticed. It was a brilliant conversation with you, sir. I think I want to end with one nice takeaway, probably, that you would like to share with the budding magicians, with the psychologists out there, the science communication people who are watching you. What would you just like to have one takeaway message for them?
I think I go back to what I was saying about passion. Is the reason I think, I've done what I've done is that I'm passionate about magic. I will spend my evenings reading about it and watching magic shows. And because of that, I know a lot about it. And each and every one of you will have a passion. It probably won't be magic. It might be something else. But if you pursue that, if you incorporate it into what it is you're doing, you'll spend longer than other people doing that because you're passionate, and you'll probably become better than them. And it's a pretty good recipe, as I say, for happiness. So follow your passion. And also, I hope the session today, and thank you very much for hosting it. Lovely questions. So thank you very much. And thank you to the festival for inviting me. I hope what we've done is open people's eyes. Magic can be a great, great tool for science communication. It's not difficult. Get out there, use it, and most of all, play and have fun.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful ending to this wonderful talk that I just wish I could just continue on with, and also see so many of different magic tricks. And I'm definitely going to go and look at some of your videos on Quirkology on YouTube, because I just really want to know more about this topic right now. Thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful evening. Hey!